Hey everyone, real quick before we get to this episode, I want to let you know that if you would like to get these episodes ad-free and before everyone else gets them, like this one's been out for at least 24 hours or so. Sometimes I put them out a few days early. So if you want to get these episodes with no ads, no introductory comments, just the conversation itself, go to patreon.com/behavioral observations to learn how you can do that. All right, let's get to this episode, and I'm really excited to share this conversation I had with Dr. Greg Hanley. So a few weeks ago, I was fortunate enough to find a couple of hours to catch up with Greg. And as you know, Greg is a many-time guest and all-around podcast fave. And it turned out to be a really lengthy conversation because he had quite a few things on his mind. Here are some of the things we talked about. We talked about his recent and new professional association with action behavior centers. We talked about the evolution of his company, FTF Behavioral Consulting, and what their plans are going forward. And we spent a good amount of time talking about the term compassionate ABA, including some of my misgivings on whether terms like these are necessary. So we have some back and forth on that. And then we get into the evolution of the practical functional assessment and skills-based treatment process, focusing more on the latter. And we distinguish between the immediate and long-term effects of reinforcement. Greg talked about efficacy versus effectiveness. I think that's a really interesting part of the conversation. We talked about some historical perspectives on functional analysis, which I think you'll also find interesting, including the unexpected topic in which the term automatic reinforcement first appeared in the literature. We talked about the role of the descriptive functional assessment, Greg's recent thoughts on head-directed self-injury, the role of tics in self-injury, and skills-based treatment's intersection with constructional approaches to behavioral intervention. And that's just a sample. Again, this podcast is over 2 hours long. And as always, there are lots of resources, links, etc. in the show notes for this episode. So go to behavioralobservations.com and look for session 283. And if you want to get these show notes delivered directly to your inbox, sign up for the email list. There'll be a pop-up when you go to the website. Just fill it out and go from there, and you'll get these show notes sent directly to your inbox. But real quick, before we get to the conversation itself, I want to let you know we're brought to you by CEUs from yours truly, Behavioral Observations. That's right, get your CEUs while you're driving, walking your dog, doing the dishes, or whatever else you have going on, all while learning from your favorite podcast guests. We're also brought to you by the Behavioral Toolbox. Check out our latest course, Motivational Interviewing, Getting Educator Buy-In, as well as the hugely popular When Not to FBA, 5 Quick Strategies for Improving Behavior in Classrooms. If you work in schools, you're going to want to check out thebehavioraltoolbox.com. We're also brought to you by Behavior University, and their mission is to provide university-quality professional development for the busy behavior analyst. Learn about their CEU offerings, including their 8-hour supervision course and their newly revised RBT course over at behavioruniversity.com/observations. Last but not least, mark your calendars for the Verbal Behavior Conference in March of 2025. That's right, March 27th through 28th, with a full-day pre-conference workshop on the 26th. If you're into verbal behavior, you're going to want to check this one out. I've been going to this conference for the last several years, and it is dynamite. So go to behaviorlive.com and look for the Verbal Behavior Conference, or again, just look for the show notes for this episode and learn more about it there. And you don't have to join us in Austin, Texas, although that would be cool if you did. You can watch live at behaviorlive.com, and those guys have really taken the online workshop experience to the next level, so you can check it out there. All right, that's it for opening remarks. Sit back and enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Dr. Greg Hanley.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Dr. Greg Hanley, it's good to see you again.
Thanks, Matt. It's really great to be back.
You'd reached out recently. You said, hey, I've got some things that are on my mind, and I'm eager to hear what is on your mind. You share with me some things you do want to talk about, and I think they will be of interest to the audience. Before we get to that, though, I know we kind of ran through some of this stuff in my recent interview with Dr. Camilleri, but just in case someone missed that, I know there's some big changes that have happened with you and your FTF colleagues, and some really new and exciting things. So why don't you start off by telling us what's new in your world, professionally speaking, and then we can certainly proceed to talk about the things that we always talk about in terms of, practical functional assessment, skills-based treatment, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. I'd be happy to. We were approached a few months back with some of the leadership at Action Behavior Center, and ABC is, I don't keep track of these things, but I believe they're one of the largest, if not the largest, provider of early intervention for kids with autism in the U.S. And we were working with them for a time in a typical small scale way, which is what we do with companies and what we call 3 client cohorts, and teaching their staff how to do PFA and SBT and some of this thing we call universal protocol. And it was going very well. And we really liked working with them. And their leadership, Sharna Mintz and I go way back. And I really liked what she was trying to build with the culture there. And then I went out for some event where there was a bunch of different speakers. I had a wonderful time, met their CEO, Hirsch, and I really enjoyed my conversations with him and the other members of the team. And I come back to FTF and I say, hey guys, can we stop going small with ABC? Can we send them a contract that will help get more of their staff trained? Because I met all these staff and they're like, we love this, but we really want to get training and there's a bottleneck. And they were basically taking the on-demand course. But as we all know, that's not enough to become super competent in this. You need an apprenticeship or consultation, supervision. So anyways, we send a contract that seemed to meet with their needs pretty well. And they came back and said, no, we want more. And it's too big. It'll be too slow. Not enough people will get access to it. So long story short, Dr. G, Mashid Gayamagami, and Tony Camilleri and myself are slowly migrating over to Action Behavior Center. And Tony and Mashid are going to be with them full time as of January. And I will be half-time as of January. And then it'll scale up as time goes on towards the summer. As far as my role, I'll always be with FTF. It's my company. There's no way I can leave it behind. And so I'll be serving as CEO of FTF forever, as far as I can tell. And I'll help guide the company as in the way I've done forever, which is a team building kind of consensus model. However, I will be doing a lot of training with ABC. And so we got a cool model that we just pulled from FTF. I go out, do 2-day trainings at all their different venues. And then Tony and Mashid follow up with on-site live supportive analyses. And then they do asynchronous supportive skill-based treatment. And then we're building a team. So every region we go to, we'll be hiring somebody from that area to be part of the compassionate care team. So when all said and done, we'll probably have a dozen or so people with us just integrated within the ABC culture to make sure people are confident doing PFA and SBT when the need arises. And a lot of people say, why would you do that at this point in your career? You know, I've had several careers within a career. Why would you do such a thing? It's a hassle, is it not? And it's going to be work. I'm not there as a leader sitting back with an ascot and a smoking jacket, giving ideas. What I'm a laborer for ABC. I'm going to go in there and work hard to teach people things that are not easy to learn. And then my colleagues are going to be there, supervisors to make sure they can do it, not just talk about it, but actually do it. And it's work. And I like to work. So that's part of it. I like work. The hardest part of FTF is making sure everyone has enough work sometimes. And so this is good work. The other part is this, Matt, is we're doing really great with public schools. I can't believe how well we're doing public schools, to be honest, because I was always scared of public schools. They're a cultural beast of their own. And, I always said, I've never been a classic school teacher and all that kind of stuff. However, we're doing great with schools because they're desperate and they have the people in place now that can do this stuff. And so we're doing really well with schools. We're doing really well internationally because internationally, people don't have a lot of baggage. They just have need and they want to do well. And I just love our international partners. You know where we've struggled? We struggle with U.S. autism companies. Now, we have several great relationships with U.S. autism companies. However, many would contract with us for a short time. They do pretty well, some better than others. And then it wouldn't scale much because they're confident. And some of them have good reason to be. And so they would simply take the materials that are freely available and build their own. And the problem with that was and continues to be is I have no idea how they're doing. Now, if they get credentialed and they keep getting their staff credentialed, then I know how they're doing. And some places do that, like Acorn Behavioral Health. Amazing team, amazing job scaling it. And we know how they're doing because they show their presentations and they get credentialed. And to get credentialed, you have to prove it with videos, data sheets, graphs, etc. But most companies, I have no idea. And that bothers me a bit. So when ABC comes knocking, I'm going to have an idea because we're going to get to do program evaluation because I hired one of my good colleagues, Dr. Linda LeBlanc, and we're independent. I do the labor. She's going to be doing evaluation. I don't even know if we'll ever have a meeting. We're putting in the independent variable. She's doing program evaluation. But the idea for me to bring this to scale in a 13,000 staffed organization that probably serves about 7,000 children, to be able to bring this to scale there is a huge reinforcer. And so that's why I'm doing it. Okay. That's why I like to work and I want to bring things to scale in places that, to be frank, we've only succeeded a couple times. And that's why we're doing it. But that said, the cool thing with FTF is Dr. Dityan Rajaraman is coming back and he'll be doing a lot of trainings. He's an amazing trainer. Holly Gover will be coming back both in January. She's also an amazing trainer and she has a great specialty in food selectivity. And there'll be another surprise announcement in a couple months about another person who will be joining us who's amazing as a consultant and trainer. And then Dr. Rupel's been elevated pretty much to executive director. And so she really is going to be in a leadership position too, but we'll work closely together. And other people at FTF are going to be elevated. So the other reinforcer for me is getting out of people's way. Do you know what I mean? At some point, the old white guy needs to get it out of the way. Now, I'm not going to retire. So this is a perfect way for me to get out of people's way. Keep me busy somewhere else. So that's another reason why this is all going down. But some people are stressed. They're stressing me a little bit. They're saying, what's going to happen to FTF? And my response is nothing except it's going to get better. We have a lot of people on the team that really know what's up. So, no, to me, it's just another opportunity on top of a good opportunity. Thanks for the chance to communicate that, though.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide it. It's funny. I think I mentioned this in my conversation with Tony, but when all these announcements with ABC started coming down the pike, for reasons I don't really, I mean, maybe just because of the history or whatever, but people were messaging me like I've got like you've consulted me on like I don't know. I'll try to figure out, but
well, if someone were to know, it would be you.
Well, yeah, I guess, but it was cute. So, well, so there's a bunch of directions we could potentially go in, and I guess one thing is, and I want to get to this notion of compassionate care because it's something that I talked about again with Tony, and I've had numerous private conversations with friends and colleagues and so forth. So I'd like to get your thoughts on deconstructing that. Maybe, but I know there's some more kind of strategic and tactical things that you want to discuss.
Let's with that compassionate care, Matt.
Okay, yeah.
We should go with your flow. You're good at this.
All right. All right. So this, it's a term that's been used quite a bit as of late, or I shouldn't even say as of late, for a number of years now. I think there's some of the papers that go back to the mid 2010s, I think, and possibly before that. And looking at this paper that you'd shared with me that you guys recently published in your group recently published in Behavior Analysis and Practice, it's toward compassion in the assessment and treatment of severe problem behavior. You wrestle with this or contend with this a little bit in terms of like, well, if applied behavior analysis is this endeavor that alleviates suffering and uses the principles of what we understand about the fundamentals of behavior to do so, isn't it by definition already compassionate? And what is the is the term compassionate care or adding compassionate or as I like to call it, any sort of hyphenated type of ABA. Hyphenated ABA is what I sometimes, jokingly refer to it as.
Yeah.
Are these things necessary? And one of the things that, I've always had a little bit of reluctance to add those, hyphenated terms personally. I'm just going to be, I've had our own,
Yes.
individual conversations about this, certainly. And not that I'm not open to it. And again, I also saw a great keynote at the 2023 FABA conference by Dr. Bill Ahern about, it's like why I'm going to butcher the title here, but it's like why I'm proud to be a behavior analyst and you should too, or something, words to those effect. And I don't know if Bill tunes into the show, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he perhaps had some of the same, might have thought along some of the same lines, and he showed various examples in the literature of what we would call compassionate approaches to resolving challenges, and to think through some of these interventions that we apply in ways that highlight the humanity of the people that we're trying to provide services to. So I know that's an awfully long windup, Greg, but I just, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Your windup is good, Matt, because it's complicated and because people are wrestling with these thoughts, just like you and I are. You mentioned a paper. It's led by Dr. G. Mashid Gaimagami, and I'm really happy with the piece. And I'm going to do my best here to respond to your question, but I really do encourage people to take a look at it. I think it takes a little bit of unpacking, and I think the paper does a good job of that. I will say this. Do I think ABA always has been compassionate? The answer is yes, in its aim. What I mean is we've aimed to be compassionate. The fact that we carry the burden of other people's challenges and we try to address extreme, for instance, severe forms of behavior, just the fact that people are courageous enough, willing to take that on and want to alleviate the suffering of that child or adult and their family or staff. Yes, all that aim is compassionate by definition. You're totally right. I also agree with you that I never wanted a hyphenated version of ABA either. I've been, people would often say when I would present early on in the early, 2012, 14, 15, what is this? What do you call this? And I said, it's ABA. It's simply ABA. And in fact, I would refer to articles, of course, Mont Wolf's article and Alan Kazan's on social validity and all that. Okay. But all that said, do I think our procedures are compassionate? And thus, do we come across to families, clients, and other allied professionals as compassionate when we actually do ABA? The answer is sometimes, and I would say often, no. So do we need a hyphenated version of ABA? Sadly, I think we do. Okay. Now, I chose today's ABA back in 2020 to try to distinguish the kind of ABA that I was happy with and happy to implement. And I kind of need to articulate it for myself. It was almost like a public commitment to leave a few things behind and add a few things in. Compassionate ABA is the same, except we have better procedures now. We have better procedures right now in 24 than we even had in 2020 that are more aligned with this idea of compassion. So I'm just going to be detail oriented.
Yeah, let's go.
Still just words at this point. So let me be very detail oriented. And I'm just going to talk about it in terms of severe behavior. Okay. So a couple things. Compassionate doesn't mean being nice. I think everyone knows that. There's probably memes about that. So let's just make that really clear. It's not being nice. I'm not sure I'm nicer than the next person, or certainly not meaner than the next person. But all that said, compassionate simply means when you're doing therapy of any sort, including ABA, that you show concern for the learner in the moment, every moment. That's how I teach it. I don't know if you need to read a whole article on it. I don't know how big of an op-def we need. It's very simple. It's not in our aim. Our aims are always compassion. Our aims have been compassionate since the 60s, okay? And made more compassionate in the 70s when people wrote about social validation. Of course, our aims are compassionate to ease suffering. but our procedures and what we've done on a regular basis lack compassion, especially as we're addressing severe forms of problem behavior. Let me be clear what I'm talking about. And I'm not calling out people. I will not name names. I am talking about my personal experiences in the field and thousands of others that I've worked with and seen, taught or been taught by. Goes like this. We'll go from a simple example. Young child with autism, they're free play, they're engaging in stereotypy, they do not yet speak. They're stimming on some beads, let's say, instead of engaging in dramatic play with their same age peers in their inclusive program. Behavior analysts, such as myself, might come and say, Sally, come to the table, and I'm going to do a little direct instruction, nice evidence-based practice, try to teach skills, because she's not going to learn skills by accident. To be autistic often means you're not going to learn certain things by accident. You need them to be explicitly taught. We can all agree on that. So I take that young lady whose developmental trajectory is flat, and I bring her over to the table. Now, she's reluctant. She doesn't want to join me, but I'm a nice person. Again, not compassionate, but a nice person. So a nice person makes the expectation clear. Sally, come to the table. Give her a little model prompt in case she didn't understand. Walk like this, you do it. And then I might gently physically guide her to the table. Now, she may start resisting a little bit. But what I'm going to do in my old version of ABA is I'm going to get her to the table. I'm going to physically bring her to the table. Okay. And that little resistance, I don't want to honor that, because I was taught, do not reinforce that behavior once an instruction has been given, as I taught many people back in the day. So I bring her to the table. Now, she settles in like many kids were, and I say, give me those beads so you're not distracted and you can attend to the material. She doesn't want to give them up. So again, I use 3-step prompting. I tell her, I show her, and I help her despite her physical resistance. I can remove those beads from her hand. I might say match red. She might throw the materials. It's not my first rodeo. I'm an applied behavior analyst. I'm going to have a bunch of sample stimuli in my back pocket. I'm going to say, match red like this, you do it. And then when she gets a little upset, I'm still going to prompt her to match red. And I'm still going to take my data. I'm going to do the expected number of trials. I'm going to make sure she doesn't learn to escape with that behavior. She might be throwing things, but I'm going to redirect her back to the task. She might try to withdraw assent, push away from the table, but I might put my meaty thigh against that back of the chair and keep her at that table, because I need to teach her that when I say do X, it's important that you do X. What I'm doing is championing cooperation or compliance above her emotional well-being. What I'm doing is championing the task at hand, the objectives, whether it's letter, number, color identification. I'm still being nice. The whole time in my heart, I'm being nice. Giving her a chance with a vocal prompt. I'm modeling it. I'm trying to be very sensitive. But nevertheless, I am holding the demand in that moment. This is just one example. Okay. No one for years, decades, batted an eyelash over that treatment of that child, and that's ABA. And if anyone wants to argue with me that what I just described is not a traditional form of ABA, they're deluded, because that's ABA.
That's exactly when I first started working with, preschoolers and early intervention. That's exactly what my supervisor told me to do.
There you go.
Yeah.
And we did
she
it
said,
for...
should pick him up and put him in the chair. And I said, well, what if he gets out? She's like, put him back in the chair. You put him back in the chair and you keep going. Now, I will say that, I can remember that particular client and that particular individual. And we, within the first session, we were up and running after a few,
We've all seen the Lovas videos. We've all seen the Lovas videos. The girls crying, resisting, escaping, avoiding. Over time, the casual version of escape extinction used by Lovas that was made a little more professional as functional analysis came to bear, and the using differential reinforcement. Yeah, you can cut through that emotional responding very quickly with some learners. There's no doubt. There's no doubt that old ABA was a godsend for many kids on the spectrum and their families. And despite the rough process, beautiful outcomes were achieved. I have no doubt about that. I witnessed them. I wasn't a big part of them, I'll admit it, but I witnessed them. And that's all true. But let me be clear. The procedure that was very successful with some learners fundamentally lacked compassion. Again, defined by me simply as showing concern for the learner in the moment, every moment. There's more to it, so let's describe it. What would we do these days? What would now be consistent with compassionate care? Number one is we start with the give, not the ask. In other words, we start with a bunch of reinforcers, and we don't make a lot of requests because we want to make sure the student wants to be there, wants to be nowhere else but there. We want to make sure that we gain assent to simply participate in the educational or therapeutic or rehabilitative space. We don't start with the instruction, come here, sit down, match red. Okay. We start with designing a beautiful environment that they want to be in. That's one fundamental difference. Next is if I begin to teach and they withdraw assent and their behavior gets severe, we're going to honor it. And we'll talk more about that. We didn't honor that in the past. So people say, well, it's the same thing we used to do. No, it's not. Pay attention, please. It's not the same thing. We're not holding kids against tables. They're withdrawing assent. We let them go. We call it vote with their feet. We call it open door therapy. Well, everyone that does SBT well, the door is literally or metaphorically open if the kid with autism wants it closed. And but they're allowed to leave whenever they want. Super important to us because kids who are entangled or trapped in therapy tend to escalate to emotional behavior that we have no behavioral technology to address. So we always let the kids go. And what it does, it puts the onus on us to figure out a way to teach better. We still use extinction. Compassionate ABA still involves extinction. Be very clear about that. Anyone on Facebook that says today's ABA, a compassionate ABA, there's no extinction, they don't understand either. It's more complicated than that. Okay, but here's the difference, Matt. Here's what extinction looks like when someone's compassionate or doing compassionate ABA. Let's say a little girl's at the table. She doesn't speak yet, but she looks at you and she's like, nah. Gives that sound, clear protest, pretty good eye contact, very deliberate. But she didn't hit herself. She didn't hit me. She didn't push away from the table. Okay, nothing severe, but clear problem behavior en route to escalation. What we do there is we acknowledge the behavior with empathy. I understand this is hard. I think I understand this is hard. You're frustrated. Okay. If they have language, we clearly are going to language with them. Okay. If they don't have language, we're still going to do it and make sure our face is connected to them, showing, connoting that we kind of understand. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to encourage persistence. We're going to say, I know hard, you're frustrated. I've seen you do it. You got this. Try again. Okay. No negotiating, no bargaining, none of that. No languaging about how much to do, but we're going to keep them in the pocket of hard. Okay. When they had a mild problem behavior. And we might even change the criteria for reinforcement. I want to do 10 trials. She's getting a little antsy at 3. If she gives me 2 more, I'm going to say, that was great. Do you want to keep working or do you want to go back to your way? Basically, let her go back, stim, play, etc. I'm going to give her choice. So the point here is it's complicated. There's no one word answer here. It's acknowledge the behavior with empathy, encourage persistence, and change the criteria for reinforcement. This isn't yesterday's ABA where you put in one word, extinction, for that behavior. It's not that. It's a series of activities to show concern for the learner in the moment while holding them to a high developmental expectation and showing them that despite the hard, you did it anyway. This is amazing when kids got language. It's really great to give reinforcement frames like this. Wow, you were super frustrated, but you did it anyway. Do you want to keep doing your math or do you want to go back and do your way? Oh, by the way, you're a kind of kid that when it's hard, you do it anyway. Amazing. That's the kind of languaging we're using now. You'd never use that language in the past. We wouldn't even language about it. Now, let's say that same kid has severe behavior. Let's say they slap their face hard. Let's say they attempt to bite, scratch, kick, hit, all the stuff we've seen for decades when we're doing ABA. What would we do in compassionate ABA? We'd reinforce it. That's an absurd thought for some people. We would completely reinforce it. We'd let them escape. We'd let them go back to play. People have a super hard time. I have to spend almost 45 minutes in a training working out this point because it's so counterintuitive. Because yesterday's ABA, we have a pathological avoidance of reinforcing problem behavior. That's how we were raised. We have a pathological commitment to not reinforcing problem behavior, and that's what got us into trouble. That's what made it so people don't like us as allied professionals, as we ignore kids with fragile language systems, as we work kids through their tears. That's yesterday's ABA. We never work kids through their tears. We don't even get kids to their tears. But if they are tearing up, we clearly are not teaching them anymore because that lacks compassion. Again, compassion is showing concern for the learner in the moment, every moment. What we do is we bifurcate the repertoire into non-dangerous and dangerous. Non-dangerous behavior, we support them through it. We don't call it partial extinction, if you want to call it. We give attention, we withhold the other reinforcers to try to help them get through it. By contrast, if we push too hard and there's severe behavior, we back off, we let them settle down, we get them affectively, physiologically right again, and then we try again. Everything I just said is way more complicated to implement than what we used to do, which was if they do problem behavior, you do X, which is a single function extinction procedure. That's not this. Okay, this is way more complicated than that. By the way, I don't think you can do compassion ABA if you don't synthesize reinforcers. That's a big rub right now. I think it's impossible to be compassionate, for your procedures to be compassionate if they're binary. You get attention or you don't. That's it. That's all we got to work with. You can't be compassionate under those conditions. But when you combine the reinforcers, you can give attention, prevents escalation, shows you're being responsive. Allied professionals don't think you're a jerk when you're ignoring a little kid with barely language and they're communicating clearly with their problem behavior. But you're withholding the other reinforcers to promote some development, to push them through the hard. So there's still some pushiness. We're ABA people. There's still a little pushiness. So people are worried you're not going to be able to be pusherton, like I like to call people. You can still do that, but you're really just acknowledging, encouraging, and getting some pretty cool outcomes.
Hey there, I just want to jump in and provide a quick reminder that if you're interested in some of the sources that we talk about in this episode, go to behavioralobservations.com and grab the show notes. Also, while you're there, check out what we have to offer in the CEU store. That's right. We've got over 60 events with all your podcast favorites, and we've got topics for just about all of your interests. We've got a lot of things covered. So go to behavioralobservations.com/get-CEUs and learn how you can get your professional development while you're on the go. All right, let's get back to this conversation with Greg. Do you think it's a language problem on our part in terms of accepting the notion of reinforcing problem behavior? You know, and what I mean, when you were just talking, and I don't have this thought fully formed, so this could go, this might not, look out. But, like the idea of, when you say reinforcement, in my mind, that sounds like make more frequent,
Yeah.
And really what it sounds to me, what you're really trying to do is de-escalate for the purposes of safety.
That's exactly right.
And maybe I'm just wondering out loud here, maybe one of the rubs of this in terms of helping people or a barrier to people understanding what this process is the word reinforcement, because it just means to make more of,
I agree. But the thing, Matt, the thing is, and this is the dilemma I faced for the last 15 years. Yeah, I could come up with a new term. I could change it, but I feel like that would be inauthentic, because here's the scoop. It is reinforcing the behavior. And I think we have to understand with a little more breadth the concept of reinforcement. For instance, anyone that, like you, worked in a basic laboratory, and you don't have to have worked in a basic laboratory, but if you had, this will make perfect sense. Reinforcement has two effects on behavior. It has the immediate or local effect, and it has the long-term effect. The long-term effect is the one emphasized in all these ABA programs. The long-term effect is, the stimulus change following behavior increases the odds of the behavior in a similar situation next time. You can replace that with your favored definition, but we're saying the same thing. Yes, it's future-oriented. We're focused on increasing probabilities of behavior through that operation. That is reinforcement. But we forget to teach people the immediate or local effect of reinforcement, and that is it terminates behavior. So when the rat hits the lever and if the dispenser finally yields the pellet, they stop behaving and they consume the reinforcer, and some continue to stop behaving even after consumption. We have names for that depending on the schedule, okay? But my point is reinforcement stops behavior. For instance, let's say I was decaffeinated right now, Matt, and which I am not, but let's say I was decaffeinated and my daughter was home and I said, Gracie, will you grab me a Diet Coke? Will you grab me a coffee? And she's not listening. She's not paying attention to me. She's an 18-year-old young lady. So I have to ask her multiple times. She finally brings me a cup of coffee. While I'm drinking the coffee, would I ever say, Gracie, can you grab me a coffee? You'd think I had a stroke, because reinforcement terminates the ongoing operant behavior. Now, people say, well, we need more research. No, we do not need more research. Look at any functional analysis study that shows within session responding, which is pretty much every ISCA study published in the last 5 years, because that's how we show the data. When you reinforce the behavior, it stops. It stops. So what I'm trying to propagate here, the idea we are propagating is this. Safety matters, like you said. Our number one value, priority, whatever you want to call it, is safety. So when that student is flipping a table or going to punch you in the face or going to punch themselves in the face, what is the one thing we could do to make sure that situation is safe? And the only thing I know as a behavior scientist is to reinforce the behavior, because I can show you hundreds of studies that shows that it terminates the ongoing operant response. So that's why we reinforce the behavior, because I need something that's going to terminate the ongoing response. And every safety procedure, emergency management procedure does not immediately terminate the response. It is a temporally extended shit show, and sometimes leads to escalation through the emotional borderlands, where we have no behavioral technology to help that kid except time passing till they pick themselves up. So yes, it's counterintuitive, but I don't think it's anything but reinforcement. Reinforcement in the beautiful, traditional sense we understand it. It's just reinforcement is more complicated than the simplistic definitions provided in textbooks and in, basic master's level coursework. I mean, the other concern, Matt, is this idea, well, if you reinforce that severe behavior, isn't it going to increase in frequency? You might stop it in the moment, but then when they're in that situation next time, aren't they going to do the same thing? And that, to me, is a smart thought as well. But the answer is no. If this tactic is embedded within another system, our system is called SBT, skill-based treatment. Now, in skill-based treatment, what are we doing? We're shaping, we're chaining, we're being highly responsive to the learner and letting all the experts tell us what's in their developmental abilities and all that. So most of the time, reinforcement's following skills. The skills of communicating, tolerating, relinquishing, transitioning, starting to do your work, doing a little work, a lot of work, all that. So when you look at our graphs, you're going to see reinforcement following skills 25 times. And then you might see reinforcement following a severe behavior once. Then you're going to see reinforcement following skills 100 times. Then you're going to see reinforcement following severe behavior once. So when you look at that, the relative probability of reinforcement for skills so greatly outweighs the probability of reinforcement for severe behavior through the simplistic understanding of the matching law, involving math whatsoever, but just understanding if the relative probability favors response class A greatly, and you don't have a lot of reinforcement history of response class B, you can still extinguish the severe behavior despite the availability of reinforcement. To me, it's the coolest thing we've learned in the last decade, because in essence, we can have our cake and eat it too. We can reinforce the severe behavior for safety, yet it doesn't strengthen. And again, this is as long as that tactic is embedded in a larger strategy of proper differential reinforcement with shaping and chaining. So again, there's a lot of counterintuitive stuff, and when people say, well, I took that course, I went to see you speak for 90 minutes and I tried it and it didn't work. It's because this is a counterintuitive behavior change technology that requires at least a couple days training and requires supervision, because this little conversation we're having is just one of many for a counterintuitive process. And anyone in ABA is more equipped to do it, but they still need to learn it, because it's not that there's unlearning. They are our fundamental concepts. I'm not going to run away from that, but they're maybe a different way to understand those concepts and certainly apply those concepts.
Meaningful change in schools starts with true buy-in from teachers and leaders. But resistance is real. Overloaded with initiatives, educators often feel unheard and overwhelmed. Our online course, Motivational interviewing, getting educator buy-in, empowers you to create genuine collaboration, learn to build trust, align with their values, and inspire lasting commitment, not just compliance. Ready to transform engagement? Enroll now at thebehavioraltoolbox.com.
One more, I guess, pushback or whatever, skeptical question of the term compassionate, I suppose, would be, and before I get to that, I appreciate the distinction with those about the question of reinforcement in the context of reinforcing severe problem behavior. That's a helpful distinction. But if we look back in medicine and perhaps other healthcare fields and things like that, there, I think we could, and again, I'm not an expert in these areas, but I think just anecdotally we can come up with examples of the evolutions of practice that have occurred, perhaps without the rebranding or the renaming of
Sure.
Just to take any medical specialty, psychiatry, cardiac,
Sure.
everything like that, and so there's, in the Civil War, if someone gets injured on the battlefield, someone sticks a piece of leather in a dude's mouth, and gets a belt of whiskey. Here, bite down on this, and then the doctor comes out with a saw, and off goes the leg. Whereas this is the stupidest example. I apologize. There's probably much better ones out there. Whereas today there's more in terms of the more treatments available for trauma in that way.
Pain meds, for instance.
Or
and leg off.
Sure. But we don't that the name of that medical care hasn't evolved. In other words, it's just I'm really struggling to try to articulate what I'm saying here. I guess what I'm saying
why do we have to name it? Why do we have to
name it? And can it not just be ABA? And ABA is an evolving science, and we are, just as we have left behind other types of practices and whatnot, if through the process of reviewing the literature that's coming in and stuff like that, the field shifts in a particular way towards these sets of practices. Well, that's what a science-based practice is supposed to do anyway, so can we be sanguine, if you will, with with calling ABA, given that assumption?
Yeah. I'm hopeful that within our lifetime, it will just be called ABA. I'm hopeful we'll return to that. I don't want a hyphenated version. However, as you know, there's a lot of shade thrown towards ABA. There are entire countries that are legislating against ABA. Okay, so let's recognize that. No one was asking the medical field to stop. Yeah, they still went. There are many families on this earth that refuse to bring their child to an ABA program because of the shade thrown towards ABA. So do we need to distinguish a particular version of ABA? Again, I used to be on the fence with this, but I'm not anymore. Yes, we do. Yes, we do, because there are still a lot of people doing traditional forms of ABA with pride. And I don't think that's healthy for us. I think change is slow. It'll always be slow. I had 10 years to change my practice. I'm not asking people to change their practice within a 2-day workshop. I ask you just to reflect and consider, try it on for size with one client, that sort of thing. And then, when you taste some success, you might bring it to scale. But that all said, like you, I have mixed feelings about today's ABA, compassionate ABA, all of that. No, I don't think it's a marketing thing. It's not a marketing thing by any means, but it is a way to distinguish, a way to do ABA, because I want to make it clear, Matt, like, you can go to certain clinics that do PFA and SBT, and you can see that form of ABA. Or you can go to other clinics in the US where they're doing ABA, but they outwardly reject PFA and SBT. And it doesn't look at all similar. They're both ABA, but it doesn't look at all similar. And there's some common ground, but there's some things that are just so diametrically opposed that they're different. And so I do believe there needs to be a name. And to be honest, I'm really happy that it is being named because certain companies in interviews basically use the names to figure out who to hire and who not to hire. And I think that's a healthy practice. And then if that goes on long enough, I think someday we'll be able to drop the hyphenation. The other part, Matt, is this. There's a certain level of evidence for the outcomes associated with doing ABA this way. And there's an amazing lack of evidence for doing ABA the old ways. And yet the old way still persists. So you understand how hard change is in this field. And I believe if you don't name it, it won't change it. So I used to be a little reluctant about this, but given the factors like the amount of hatred, it maybe is too strong a word, but no, I don't think it is. The amount of hatred towards ABA, if you consider that, if you consider how slow people are to change, I think it's important that you name it. In fact, I like people to pledge. We have a pledge. It's cheesy. It's like a Cub Scouty thing. I went to Australia a few months back in one of the companies out there in Sydney, really nice company. And they had people, they gave them a chance to kind of sign the pledge and they were framing them and all that stuff. And part of me was like, oh, this is too much, right? This is too much. But, because anyone else looking at that would say, look at this culty sort of thing. But at the same time, the other part of me, I was completely proud of it because these people were putting the stake in it, saying this is how we're going to practice going forward because they were producing outcomes that they weren't producing the other way. And so I'll end this part on this thought, Matt. It's not, I want the procedures to be beautiful. I want them to be safe. I want people to stop throwing shade towards this because I truly believe in the science of behavior and its applications to severe behavior and the unique problems associated with autism. And a lot of people are not embracing it because of our past. And all that, we need to do better. And the naming, I think, is part of that. But you know what the real reason why I think the name's important is because it's associated with the technology that has 20 replications with socially validated outcomes from 12 different research groups in 6 countries. And the old ABA for severe behavior doesn't have a single study with a socially validated outcome, not one. And so, be honest, I'm getting a little tired. Like, it's not even a debate at this point. We have 20 replications with socially validated outcomes. The study by Jessica Slayton that just came out in JABA, a 1 to 2 year follow-up with kids with very severe problem behavior that were experiencing crisis procedures on the regular, no crisis procedure, no behavior controlling meds, elimination of severe behavior, completion of their IEP goals. You can't find that with the other ABA. That's what's really troubling for me. Everyone wants to talk about the words. They want to talk about trauma. Is it trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive, trauma-assumed? Is it compassion, not compassion? We're dancing around with these ideas because it makes us feel uncomfortable that maybe we weren't being compassionate or we weren't being trauma-assumed, and we weren't because we didn't know. But that's not really where the issue is, and it's distracting people from the real issue. And the real issue is we do so much in the name of ABA that has no good evidence behind it. No good evidence. And we have this thing that this community of people from 12 different research groups in 6 different countries have produced these beautiful outcomes. We have parents presenting outcomes at conferences using these procedures with their own children around the world. And yet we have people in the place where ABA was born, refusing to even give it a look as they keep on doing their old procedures that have never, ever yielded a socially validated outcome. That's the real issue.
All right. Nothing like picking a very dramatic moment to pause and tell you about Behavior University. That's right. Their mission is to provide university quality instruction for the busy behavior analyst. And, the last couple of times I've talked about Behavior University, I really recommended that you take a look at their webinars. And I always mention they sell out, and the first 2 webinars on their schedule are sold out. But you're in luck because as of this recording, the January 10th, 2025 webinar with Dr. Celia Heyman on, guess what? A compassionate approach to understanding and addressing interfering behaviors aligns pretty well with this topic we're listening to right here from Dr. Hanley. That is available. It's only available for now, though, because again, these things do sell out. So go to behavioruniversity.com and click on the webinars link and sign up for not just that, but they've got a whole host of other really interesting ones. Ones on gerontology, anxiety, supervision, and lots more. They also have RPT courses, supervision courses. So whatever you need, they probably have it. So go to behavioruniversity.com and don't forget to use the promo code podcast at checkout to save on your purchase. All right, let's get back to this conversation. Maybe we should spend a moment talking about what you mean by a socially validated outcome.
Yeah.
While listeners can fire up their email client to send me missives, if you will. So let's talk about that. What do you mean by that?
Good. You know what I really want to talk about? Let me start, and I'm with you. I'll get to social validation, but it really, the fundamental difference lies in these two terms. And I remember when I was in AE for Java early on, I remember teaching kind of a general psychology methods course, and I came across these two terms and two different ways to talk about evidence, and I shared it with the editorial group at the time, and we, for whatever reason, it didn't go anywhere, and I tried to bring it back as editor of the journal myself in my own editorial comments when I was editor of Java, and it still really went nowhere, even under my leadership. So, but this is the issue I believe that we're wrestling with right now. It's the difference between efficacy and effectiveness. And these terms are used in medicine, they're used in psychology, and we tried to get them used in behavior analysis, but we're slow to use them. And if you look in any journal that publishes ABA work, people use the terms interchangeably, and mainly we'll use the term effective. And we're using the term effective incorrectly, given two ways of knowing the term. When people use it again in medicine and psychology, they distinguish between efficacy and effectiveness. I'll talk about that. But also, we're not using it consistent with how Mont Wolf asked us to use the term effective. So we're using the term effective liberally, generously, and out of stimulus control of two very important ways of understanding. So the first one, the general psychology and medical approach, they distinguish efficacy and effectiveness this way. Efficacy means, they both mean it works. It being an independent variable, it being a treatment, it being a therapy, an assessment process. Efficacy and effective both mean it works. However, efficacious means it works under highly controlled conditions, in short sessions, for a short amount of calendar time, when implemented by experts. That's what it means, it works. Now, Java is a journal of efficacy. Our methods, single subject designs without any other bells and whistles, are efficacy methods. Usually, not always, but usually they're highly correlated. Now, effective means it works when implemented over longer term periods, over longer periods of calendar time, in authentic environments like schools, homes, clinics that are funded outside of research grants, etc., when implemented by staff, parents, direct care workers. Okay. The other thing about effective means other parts of it works have been evaluated, like cost-benefit analysis, like feasibility, like social validity, meaning constituents describe whether they thought the procedures were acceptable, and that's not really the one that's that interesting to me. It's more the third one, as Mont Wolf and Kasdan described, and that is, are the effects appreciable to you? Was the amount of behavior change satisfactory? So when I say we don't have a single study with a socially meaningful outcome, to backtrack to your question, we don't have a single study where someone said, were the effects meaningful to you? Was the size of the effect important? Or say in a less traditional way, can you now teach without fear? Can you bring the child into the community? Those questions have never been asked with a behavior modification-based treatment, like an arbitrary food-based, punishment-based DRO, nor have they been asked with what's the single function model. But I'm saying that question's been uttered in 20 different studies with over 200 participants, again, across a bunch of different research groups. And the answers by and large are yes, the amount of behavior change was meaningful to my family, to my classroom, etc. So what I'm saying is the what's the function model, the BMOD model, it works, meaning it's efficacious. But that stuff isn't doing too well in practice because it's never been proven effective. By contrast, why in such a short period of time are people all over the world doing PFA and SBT? Well, it's because it works under real world conditions when implemented by people that don't have, PhDs, and they're getting meaningful outcomes. So again, we're getting distracted by the term, not that we need the terms. I said we need to name it. So I'm glad we're having that conversation. But you know what conversation I really want people to have? I want people to take an honest look at the evidence base for what they're doing. And I want them to ask, are they seeing a beautiful little control of behavior and a nice reversal design in a highly controlled situation for 5-minute sessions under a calendar time of a month with absolutely no integration in real world conditions and absolutely no questions to the parents or the teachers about whether the treatment had a meaningful impact on their life? I want you to look at the evidence for what people are doing and see if you have that. And if you don't, you might want to look elsewhere. And what I'm saying is the PFA SBT research base has a ridiculous amount of social validation. Now, early in my career, some of the people I used to hang with didn't really care much for social validation, despite their amazing respect for Mott Wolf. They thought it was kind of a rubbish idea. They thought it was rubbish because it was subjective. They thought it was kind of outside the scope of our science. And I kind of understood what they were getting at. But here's the thing, Matt. If you're not willing to ask that question once, like not once, I think that's telling. Yeah. Yes, it is subjective when a parent says, yes, we can move numbers around from 6s to 7, depending on how we administer a social validation assessment, all that. But that said, the score 20-0 has to be reconciled at some point. Yeah.
Hey, real quick, I just want to jump in and let you know that if you want to get these podcasts ad-free and you want to get them before the public feed drops, go to patreon.com/behavioral observations to learn how you can support the show with a Patreon subscription. That's it. Let's get back to the conversation with Greg. I appreciate you delving into that efficacy versus effectiveness. And that also was occupied some page space in that article that we were talking about earlier. So I will make sure that article is pinned to the show notes of this episode. I've already got a notebooks page worth of notes right here, and I'll make sure that gets typed up and put in the show notes. And just as an aside to it's a pain in the butt, and
it is.
I've bumped into listeners at conferences and things like that, and they've let's just say they've reinforced that show note taking repertoire.
No. As an aside, Matt, I have to tell you this. I'm hustling because of this relationship with ABC that's coming down the pike, and I'm traveling a lot. And I've been in Egypt last week. I'm going to Guatemala next week. I've been to Australia. I'm going to all these fun countries, and it's pretty amazing. I get the chance to do that. And when I go to these places and I say, how did you learn about this? How did you know about our stuff? Why did you contact me? I would say 9 out of 10, it's because of the Behavioral Observations podcast. It's true. I said that in your second podcast. Maybe I said, in your second podcast, I remember saying, hey, a lot of people know about this stuff because of your podcast. Still to this day, it's the number one reason why people know about this stuff.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I just want you to know that, and just take a pause to thank you for the chance to allow me to spread these ideas. I mean, whether people like them or not, just thankful that you give me a chance to get the word out there and let people discover things and at their own pace. But, the journal articles and all that, it's just the pace of dissemination is just not good enough.
I appreciate that, Greg. And it's I think the timing is, through the course of the various shows that we've done has been fun because the practice of what you've done is, has evolved. And I think we want to get to that and shortly hear about some of your first descriptions of the SBT PFA process and what things have stayed the same and what have changed. But I can't help but to comment on a specific section of the paper where you guys talk about descriptive analysis.
Oh, yeah.
and you and I got into this on one of our previous shows as well, and I meant to go back and try to listen to those comments again, and I honestly I forgot which show it was on, and so I'll just ask you to tee it up again. And it sounds like what was written in the paper is a little more strongly worded than perhaps our original conversation. Anyway, so what is so every person in taking ABA 101, or whatever they get, somewhere in the course sequence, they're taught how to take ABC data, and so what is for those who have no idea what the about our previous exchanges on this have been, what is the current consensus on descriptive assessment as you guys describe it in this paper?
Well, I want to be clear. There's no consensus.
Yeah, I mean, consensus.
That's the reason why we're talking about it.
How did you guys characterize descriptive assessments, and where do you see its role, if that, in what we do as behavior analysts? Because it's a cornerstone of our training. It's been around forever.
Yeah, one of my favorite people in the field, Sid Bijou, introduced it to us. Yeah, and how could he be wrong? One of the smartest guys ever entered our field. So he's not wrong. Descriptive assessment is an amazing tool, beautiful tool. It's in the conditions of usage that we're really talking about. And so let me just talk about that. Don Beer, let's talk terms first. So let's just talk terms. Descriptive assessment versus descriptive analysis. I've written about this for like 15 years. No one cares, but I'm going to say it anyway. Analysis means observation with the manipulation of the environment in some way, right? We all agree on that one. Analysis, observation of the environment, manipulation of the environment. Analysis and experimentation, the same words, but experimentation, is reserved for certain conditions. Analysis is more broad. Very good. Descriptive analysis to me is an oxymoron. A descriptive assessment involves no analysis. A descriptive assessment is observation without manipulation of the environment. So I know the term descriptive analysis has been published, despite me being a reviewer at some of those papers saying, please call it descriptive assessment. That sometimes message has not been heeded. But I'm talking about descriptive assessments where you're merely observing behavior, often in natural environments, and not necessarily, could be in a session room kind of thing. And you're writing down or tapping out on a keyboard the antecedents that preceded the behavior and the consequences that followed. And descriptive assessments can be open or close-ended. Close meaning you're going to hit a particular key, there was no attention, a demand was given, that sort of thing. Or it's open-ended, more narrative-based. Okay. What's our beef, if you will, with this thing, descriptive assessment? It's not with the tool in general. It's with the tool being used in a functional assessment process. Okay. So descriptive assessment has a life outside as any researcher is going to use observation, like an anthropologist and a sociologist and a school psychologist. It has utility there, just observing phenomena, usually under natural conditions. You can learn things, and you're usually writing down something about, in our world, the behavior, how they're behaving, and what's going on before and after. It is a way to discover in a broad sense, and it has great utility in that regard. But functional assessment has been around for a long time. Yeah. The first person to ever do a functional analysis, I don't think most people know this, but it's Lovaas. Lovaas was the first person to actually do an analysis, provide a contingent event on behavior, show its worsening with that event, show reinforcement sensitivity, okay, with humans. So it's been around, let's say, since the late 60s, early 70s. So let's do the math, over 50 years. So I think we're allowed to evolve the process a bit. And ABC recording and descriptive assessment has been a part of functional assessment for a long time. We don't encourage it really at all in the functional assessment process, mainly because most of those 20 studies that I just mentioned didn't do any descriptive assessment in their process. What they did was an open-ended interview and an analysis. They put a student in the room, provided reinforcers non-contingently, then provided evocative events, turned on and off behavior. That's an analysis, okay? So that's nothing descriptive about that. And then the interview is not a descriptive assessment, although some book chapters confuse that. They put descriptive assessment as an overarching category. It's not. There's interviews, then there's observation without manipulation, descriptive assessment, and then there's analyses. We're saying skip the middle part. Interview, analyze. Now, why are we saying that? Well, number one, because it works. And I'm using that in terms of effectiveness. It has treatment utility, demonstrated treatment utility. I'm saying that because it's efficient, because parents and teachers have been doing their own descriptive assessment informally of problem behavior for years. And I'm saying just trust the competence and integrity of parents and teachers. Ask them the right questions. They will teach you stuff and save you some time. I'm saying that because ABC recording usually confuses people and is wrong. And if you look at some of the DA studies that do exist, they show you the disagreements between, different descriptive assessments and analyses, etc. I'm not really focused on that. But the point being here is just because it's prevalent in the observational environment doesn't mean it's relevant to the control of behavior. No matter how much ABC record, no matter how many reams of data you have, how many pie charts you make, you just have prevalence. This happened a lot before the behavior, or this happened a lot after the behavior. But just because it happened a lot doesn't mean it's a controlling variable. To understand a controlling variable, you need an analysis. Turn on and off the behavior with the manipulation of that variable. Descriptive assessment confuses us because the idea of relevance gets conflated with prevalence. We like to say just because it's prevalent doesn't mean it's relevant. The other reason I don't really like is because of how much time it takes. How many people have done ABC recording, especially if you're a master's level expensive consultant? You're sitting in the classroom and you're waiting for the proverbial shit to hit the fan for your target student, but you're waiting hours. Sometimes you'll go the whole day and you don't see the behavior. And what you're probably doing is watching a whole bunch of other students misbehave, and you really just want to say, hey, can we sign them up for a functional assessment as your student is acting like a great citizen? So it takes all these hours away from where we could be doing something maybe more effective. But you know why it's brought up in that compassionate paper? Because to me, when I see people doing ABC recording, especially master's level behavior analysts doing ABC recording, they are watching a student engage in severe behavior. They are watching a parent or teacher engage that student with complete futility. And they're simply taking data. Can you imagine if someone was having a heart attack on an airplane and a medical doctor just kind of observed what people were doing, what was prevalent, how did people try to help this person? And they just observed and took data and they didn't get down on their knees and try to help that person? That's why we talk about it in the compassionate paper. I think descriptive assessments fundamentally lack compassion because we are not showing concern for the learner in the moment. What we're doing is showing concern for our data sheets, showing concern for some ideal that we're going to discover some amazing, unique controlling variable through our observations, which we don't have a single study showing we do. In fact, when most people do descriptive assessments, they're close-ended. They're not open-ended. They're closed-ended. So they're not discovering jack. They're simply checking off boxes that we've known about for decades, okay? I'm going to give you an analogy, Matt. Here's the analogy I like to use if I was in a training. I say, who's been to an allergist? People raise their hand. I say, okay. What's the first thing they do? They do an open-ended interview, don't they? They take the amount of allergens in your geographic region, and they're trying to narrow down the possible ones that you may be negatively affected by. They ask you about your symptoms, your behaviors. They ask you about the controlling variables for them. That's what we're saying do. Do the same thing. Then what do? If you go to an allergist? Well, what they do is they poke you with needles. You all know that. They poke you with needles of the suspected allergens from the interview. They poke you with the same allergen twice because they're scientists. They know that replication is the key to believability. They do a control poke with saline because they're doing a test control analysis on your body. That's what we're suggesting doing. Don't test everything. Don't be generic about it. Personalize it. Test it in a controlled analysis. You know what the allergist doesn't do? The allergist doesn't get in their car, drive home with a clipboard or laptop, follow you around your neighborhood, and when you sneeze, look around for the correlates. Now that seems absurd, right? That's funny to even think about. I like to say medical doctors have professional self-respect. And that's something I'd like behavior analysts to develop who are out there driving cars around neighborhoods and following kids around with ABC charts, thinking they're going to discover something. Again, Matt, show me one study, put this on the podcast. Maybe someone will send me an email. Show me one study where the starting point was a descriptive assessment and the end point was a socially validated treatment outcome based on the results of that descriptive assessment. And I bet you no one will email me that study. Now, I'm not keeping up like I used to, but I'm pretty sure that study doesn't exist. It'll never exist because the process of ABC recording as discovering controlling variables is broken. It doesn't set you up. It doesn't. You know what you need, Matt, to treat severe behavior? You need a relationship with the learner, which you're not getting when you're sitting back watching. What you need is a context to provide therapy, which we'll call skill-based treatment. Descriptive assessment is not giving you that context. You're simply sitting in the wild of the classroom while the shit goes on. That's not it. You need a therapeutic context. That's what the analysis gives you. We got to control things. We got to do things. Okay, so I like the people I work with to be doers. Show respect and to the families and teachers. Ask them questions. They know stuff. That's how you get buy-in. You start a relationship where you start asking questions, not pouring yourself into somebody. And then the second part is you emulate what they tell you in the analysis, and you don't need to do the DA. Now, that said, so I hope I made it clear why we think descriptive assessments lack compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I tried to drill that point home. Again, I'm not trying to make people feel bad. Don't blow up your systems. If you're scheduled somebody listener to go to a school tomorrow to do ABC recording, go do your job. Do your job. All I'm saying is try on emphasize this process that has no descriptive assessment in the functional assessment. Try it on emphasize with one student and see if you can be as or perhaps more effective having not done that. Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things that was on the agenda to talk about is, we talked a lot about things that, people should rethink how they or reframe how they see these historical strategies, if you will, or even current. I shouldn't say historical because they're quite current.
Yeah.
Regardless of
more current than not.
Regardless of what people might think of them. But you also want to spend some time talking about, what you call green flags. What are some of the things that we've gotten right, things that have been added considerable value to the people we serve, to the science, and so forth. So I want to give you the opportunity to perhaps riff on that for a bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, in ABA in general, is that what we're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think you called them gifts, or
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I often say it because sometimes I feel like I'm a little negative. Like that whole thing on DAs is negative because I am trying to say, hey, let's stop doing that. You know what I mean? So that's pretty negative. Like stop, terminate. But that said, no, I think the field's given amazing gifts to me and everyone else. I'll tell you the best gift I was ever given was this idea of function. I hope people don't miss that when we're talking about all these acronyms and compassion and trauma assumed and PFA SPT. We don't forget the fact that some people came out of the behavior mod woodwork and they said, hey, I have an idea that behavior, no matter how extraordinary, can be learned on ordinary conditions and can serve a purpose or a function for the learner. And maybe you should figure out that function before you ever attempt to change behavior. That's the idea behind the whole functional assessment process. And who gave us that idea? Who gifted us that idea? That's getting weaker. Every year I ask that question to people in trainings, and most people don't know. So let's talk about who gave us that idea. Ted Carr gave us that idea. He wrote a paper in 1977 about the motivations behind self-injurious behavior. He's the one that really took us from moving away from talking about ego and id when it came to severe behavior and started talking about the controlling variables that were right under our nose. And Brian Awada obviously was inspired by that conceptual piece, and he actually did the hard work of putting a methodology behind the ideas. And Ted Carr was building a methodology behind the ideas too. His just fell out of favor a little bit, and Brian Awada's fell in more favor because it was more efficacious. And that's not presumably. Comparative studies, there were a few of them in the 90s and early 2000s that kind of demonstrate that. The Ted Carr model didn't talk a lot about consequences. In fact, Ted Carr, for all his brilliance, one of my favorite people in our field that I never directly worked with, he wrote on multiple occasions that to provide reinforcement, for severe problem behavior would be unethical. I'll say it again. He wrote in multiple places, to provide reinforcement for severe behavior would be unethical. So he favored these antecedent analyses. It's ironic because we now know that the safest thing you can do for severe behavior is to reinforce it. That's how much we've come along. Okay. So please understand why these ideas are so counterintuitive, I guess. But back to the gift. The gift is Ted Carr, Brian Iwata, and yes, Lobos early on. All of them and many, many more gifted us with this idea that you don't just flip around reinforcers and punishers to change behavior. Just because you can control behavior doesn't mean you necessarily should, that we should start with understanding first. I mean, that idea is brilliant. It's still brilliant. It's still a big idea. A lot of places we go, people don't know that idea. They still want to talk about, they still want to go private. They want to go deep. They want to go into diagnostics and brain juices and all that. And this idea is so powerful. So I always like to remind people of that gift. We should never put that back. Now, I know I'm supposed to be in the positive part, talking about the gifts, but let's just talk about, there's still some limits to that gift. And the limit to the biggest mistake we made, I think, in the field, the biggest mistake we made, the biggest gift is function. The biggest mistake is thinking that extraordinary behavior was happening for a single function. I think that's the biggest mistake we made since moving over to functional assessment. This idea was really transported from the basic lab. It made sense. You know what I mean? There was single response reinforcer relations in all our basic research at the time. It made sense to kind of come up with a diagnostic classification system that was a little bit more function-based. It all made sense at the time. But we now know that has led us down a path that's really hard to get out of. It's hard to get people to shake the idea of single function. No single function study has ever yielded a socially validated outcome, but people are still spouting off about it at every conference I go to, every poster session, every time someone gets a microphone and they deal with severe behavior, they're still talking about single functions. Again, despite not a single study showing effectiveness of the process. And it's also, again, committed us to this, I like to call it these days, this pathological avoidance of reinforcing problem behavior. Because when you have a single function, it's binary. You can either provide reinforcement or not. Yes, that's all you got. And so when you embrace single function, you're also embracing a system where you're going to be relying on extinction and all the phenomena associated with it that isn't too pleasant often. And so I think those are our greatest gift is the idea. The procedures have really, we made mistakes. And what we're talking about now is not a revolution. Like, it's not revolutionary. It's just an evolution. Just like you mentioned earlier in the podcast. It's just a natural evolution towards a way of doing the business of figuring out the controlling variables for problem behavior, which is the essence of being a behavior analyst. The essence is not function. Okay. The essence is understanding the variables controlling behavior. And once you loosen it up like that, it's it's a bit of an easier transition. I guess the other gifts for me are shaping, task analysis of skills, shaping, chaining, differential reinforcement. Those are the tried and true things in our toolbox. And every couple of years, I realize that the people I work with are so much better at chaining and shaping than we ever used to be. And we always knew that we were shapers, right? We always knew that was where we should be. But if you look at Java and similar journals, there aren't shaping articles, and people still love to call it an art. And that's a little bit of a problem. So again, I'm talking about the gift, and the gift is task analysis, breaking down complex repertoires into components, composite skills into components, and then using differential reinforcement to shape approximations, and not forgetting that chaining, that often is not shaping, it's just adding on a new link in the behavior chain. But the problem, again, to keep it all balanced, the problem is we don't have studies on shaping. And my colleague, Cara LaCroix, is poised to publish a review paper on shaping. Ooh. And I'll tell you how many studies there are in the applied work on shaping. There's like 2. There's a lot of studies that use the term, but there's always things added that make it not shaping. Usually the culprit is prompting. But true shaping is not something we have in our research base. Okay. We have more of these package teaching interventions. So the reason why I'm talking about this is I'm realizing now that the other gift was this idea of chaining and shaping. And we haven't really taken that gift and used it in the powerful way that we can until recently. And again, I'm seeing people use shaping and chaining in ways that are just magnificent. And I've never seen anything like it in the past. And I think part of it is because these kids are very motivated, because these folks are relying on synthesized reinforcement. So when you have proper motivation, shaping is obviously easier because you're getting a lot more behavior thrown at you to differentiate with the contingency. So that again, in retrospect, the gifts are function, but procedurally we had a funny spot. The gift is task analysis, shaping, and chaining, but we never really realized the power of those gifts. And so I'm really, in a strange way, kind of stoked about the future. I'm stoked to see young BCBAs kind of lap me in my skill set because they are going to go in with the technology that is just way more powerful. And we've been talking about it for 40, 50 years, but I believe it's here now where people can actually use it under real world conditions and get those beautiful outcomes. I don't know if you remember, Matt, I know you're a historian of the field as much as anybody, more so. But there's that amazing article in Psychology Today, 1972. I think it's called Shapers at Work. And there's a bunch of thumbnail pictures of about 60 behavior analysts at the time. And the article is dripping with hope. And it describes each person's kind of field of application. And there's people working everywhere: sports, business, disability, education. And there's men and there's women and there's diversity too. I mean, it's largely white and male, but not exclusively by any means. There's diversity, there's hope, there's variety of application. And the article ends and you're like, this is amazing. These people are going to change the world.
52 years later.
There you go. And
where's my flying car?
That's what I'm saying. Where's our ABA flying car? But what I'm saying, Matt, is that hope that I remember kind of getting from that article, and then the little depression that followed when I realized we weren't even close to realizing the expectations set forth in that article. I feel that now. I do. And a lot of people like to lament the young people entering our field because like they're coming from only 4 programs and they're online and this and that. And those challenges are real. We have a lot of young people in the field and experience matters and they got to catch up and get some years under their belt and all that. But that said, I'm way more hopeful for an ABA future because I do believe the technology and the values are all aligned right now for people to do amazing things and get amazing outcomes because I see it. Every time I get on a plane and go places, I see these outcomes and I'm blown away by them. And I can't say I was blown away by outcomes when I went to conferences for the first X many years of my career. I was blown away by the functional control. I was blown away by the science. I was blown away by the ideas, but I was never blown away by the outcome. You know what I mean? I never sat back and said, holy smokes, look how they solved that SIB aggression or property obstruction. I was blown away by outcomes about potty training and sleep and, stuff like that. But I was never blown away by outcomes of severe behavior because all we did was kind of kick around the problem, re-describe it, back it up, add another assessment. But we weren't focused on beautiful outcomes. And I see beautiful outcomes just so regularly right now. So I think the future's bright, is what I'm saying.
Well, you mentioned self-injurious behavior. So that's a good segue to talk about some of your thoughts on head-directed SIB that you wanted to get into. So please, by all means, lay it on us. What was on your mind when you brought this up, and what are your current thoughts on it?
Yeah, at FTF, we're going to put out a CU course on this. So I don't want to go too far into it because I'm afraid I might lose some people who aren't interested maybe in this head-directed SIB topic. But I'll try to give you this quick version, Matt. If you asked me 3 or 4 years ago, you got a student, SIB occurs across all conditions. It appears to be automatically maintained, or what other people might say, maintained directly by the sensory products of the self-injurious behavior. Can you use PFA and SBT with that learner? And I would have said no. I said, don't bother. if this process does not apply if the suspicion is automatically reinforced behavior. And how do you get that suspicion? Well, people tell you it occurs across all conditions. People like me used to run traditional and functional analyses. It would persist in the alone condition. So there's no stimulus change following the behavior, but yet it would persist, or persist in what we used to call the ignore condition. It would also be elevated in all conditions, and it would just be high and variable. So again, I'm not talking about behavior where there's differences when you give them toys, okay, competing items. That's not what I'm talking about. That's easy to treat. That's not intractable head-directed SIB. That's just head-directed SIB. Okay, I'm not talking about kids that's low in the attention condition because reprimands work as punishment. If a reprimand were to work as a punishment of the behavior, it's not the kind I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of behavior that persisted across all conditions, and it was just really, we didn't have a good handle on it, okay? And that was the kind of behavior that was my favorite early in the field when I got a chance to move from group homes to real hospital clinical work. Those were the kind of kids I like to work with the most, and I did work with the most, and I learned a lot. And we published, papers on restraints and restraint fading, and I was very privileged to be part of those projects and whatnot. However, here's the scoop. We can help those kids now with PFA and SBT. And it's kind of an accident how we arrived there, and some deliberate scholarship over the last 2 years. So let's talk about the concept of automatic reinforcement really quick, because I don't want people to get the wrong idea. So let me give you the thesis, if you will. Automatic reinforcement, I don't think we should ever say, not ever, I don't think that's a controlling variable for SIB with any kid I've met in the last 3 or 4 years. I'll say it one more time. Automatic reinforcement is not a useful concept for explaining, describing why behavior persists, SIB persists for kids. Now, let me back up. Do I think automatic reinforcement is a great concept? Yeah, I think it's an amazing concept. Skinner talked about it. Why do we have all this behavior when no one praised or gave us a cookie? Well, there's some automatic consequences to when you behave in the environment, when you hit a mobile, when you open a door. It's a great concept. It explains why we have a lot of behavior without a lot of coaching, teaching, and training. I love it. Brian Iwata, by the way, was the first person to ever utter the word automatic reinforcement in an applied article. The funny thing is, he didn't talk about it with severe behavior. He talked about it with preventative dentistry. It was part of an article where they incentivized people to floss and brush better. And when they got good dental scores, no plaque, they received a reduction in their dental bill. And in the discussion, he talked about how you won't need to use the incentives for long because the automatic reinforcement associated with flossing should maintain that behavior over time, and you won't need to use the fee reduction. So he was the first person to mention it. Very cool. And if you floss, you know what he's talking about. The flick on the mirror will help you floss more. Okay, very good. He did not talk about it when it came to severe behavior. Ted Carr talked about it initially in that article I mentioned earlier, talked about the sensory products of the behavior being one possibility, why it might persist. A bunch of other people wrote articles about it with SIB. I found those intriguing. We used it when I worked with Kathleen Piazza. We used it to understand why kids would engage in cigarette pica, why they would engage in saliva play, dangerous climbing behavior, and the construct, why someone engages in certain forms of stereotypy that are very intractable. We've used it to help with those problems in the past. So the concept has great utility to me, automatic reinforcement. However, when it comes to head-directed SIB, I think it's a big problem. I think it's a problem because, first, when we utter it, we really mean we have no control over behavior. But instead of saying it's undifferentiated, or instead of being humble and saying we don't know why, but let's keep looking, we say automatic, and the search stops. That's a problem. Because again, I grew up doing this stuff in the early 90s. I remember the pivot. I'm still confused by it. One year we'd publish the same graph. We'd say undifferentiated. 2 years later, we said automatic. It just kind of picked up like wildfire. Again, the backstory to automatic reinforcement, the one that holds the most, was really articulated well by Travis Thompson, but others articulate the same thing. And the idea is that these forceful blows release a compensatory response to the pain, which is the release of endogenous opioids. And so that's what's maintaining the behavior, this release of endogenous opioids. It makes sense. It's coherent. But again, when someone punches their face, and I've watched, sadly, many, many, many hours and hours of videos or live seeing kids hit, I've never seen anyone sit back with this relief like they just got high, like they just took a hit. I know what that looks like too. It doesn't look like that. When kids hit themselves, they're anguish. They experience pain. Their public accompaniments are not that of pleasure or relief. Okay. So that's another red flag. The other bit is when we say automatic reinforcement, there's no function-based treatment. I go around the world and I see these kids in arm splints, like the one I took a picture of in 1995. And these kids are just in splints. That's their life, in a helmet, being restrained, or, they're not function-based treatments. They're just safety management tactics. And the kid's still on a 10-second edible DRO. There is no function-based treatment for automatic reinforcement of self-injury. That's another problem. There's also studies where people have taken cerebral spinal fluid samples to see if there's a difference in opioids following before, during, and after self-injury. Dangerous studies never showed anything. There's a whole bunch of studies on naltrexone and naloxone.
I've seen naltrexone work at once or twice, but it's more often than not.
There you go.
It doesn't.
Yeah, the signal in the literature is not strong, quite mixed is being generous. And any families I talked to, the kids were on it, they're short-term effects. And you'd expect to see a little extinction and then come down. That effect isn't shown either. And so it's probably more of a sedative effect for some of these kids. But nevertheless, no one is publishing socially validated outcomes with naltrexone.
No.
Let's put it that way. Let's just make that our line in the sand.
Sure.
Okay. And so here's our new thoughts. First is stop saying automatic reinforcement. I truly believe we're screwing kids when we say automatic reinforcement. Sorry for all the people that just publish book chapters and have our talks lined up for the May conference with automatic reinforcement of SIB. But I'm just telling you, I believe it's our third mistake. I believe it's our third mistake, and we'll maybe realize that 10 years from now. I realized it recently. And here's the idea, Matt. These kids are doing the behavior, this head-directed SIB, to get out. You're going to remember, you've heard this before, to get out of shit they don't want to do the shit they want to do with people they give a shit about. They're doing it for the same reasons other kids engage in problem behavior, but there's two other things to consider. In addition to the traditional synthesized contingency, number one, avoidance, and number two, tics. So when I say avoidance, most of your audience probably knows the difference between escape and avoidance, but Beers probably should describe it. Escape means some noxious, aversive, whatever event is presented, do math, stand up, walk over here, do this, put down the stimmy toy, do your work. Something's presented, self-injury happens, it terminates that thing, it strengthens the behavior through the termination of the present aversive. By contrast, avoidance, there's nothing presented that's aversive, it's more postponement of the aversive interaction. And, we can get into the details of two-factor avoidance and single-factor and Sidman and all that. And if you're into that, I wanted to alert your readers to an article by Frans van Haren. Look for Frans van Haren's article on self-injurious behavior and avoidance. He's really the first person who articulated this. When I say first person to bring the idea back, please know that the original functional analysis talked about avoidance. Avoidance was something talked about early on in the early 80s, but for some reason it fell out of favor again. So everything kind of has been here. It just some things fall out of favor. So what we're noticing with some of these kids is their SIB is, again, escape to stuff and attention, all that traditional stuff, but it's also avoidant. And when it's avoidant, man, it's hard to treat. And when it's avoidant, it masquerades as automatic reinforcement because people are doing, oh, here we go. They're doing ABC recording. They're watching the kid. There's no change in the antecedent. There's no change in the consequence, and yet the behavior persists. And so what do people say when they see that? They say, oh, it must be maintained directly by the sensory products. It makes sense. But I think we're wrong. For a lot of these kids, they are masters of avoidance. We now, for lack of a better term, Matt, we can profile kids. We can profile them through our process and through what we see in the analysis. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. Avoidance kids, when we say, hey, what's the probability when you provide all their reinforcers, what's the probability you're going to get 0 SIB? They'll be like, no, never. You'll never get 0 SIB. Now, when someone just has regular old SIB, they'll say, yeah, if you give them all this stuff, don't have them do their work, give them attention, all that, yeah, it'll be 0. That's telling me not tics, not avoidance. But when they say, no, we'll never get 0, you can't get 0, Now I'm alerted to it's either avoidance or tics or both. So the avoidance profile kids, no one believes they can get 0. The second thing is these kids tend to love to hide. They like to have blankets on their head. If I find them in public schools, they're in a tent. They're under their blankets. They're the ones with hoodies on, with a hat on, with a jacket over their head. They tend to be small. They tend to sit like in the W position. They're never big. They never make great eye contact. They don't run around the room being silly and socializing. They're small. They're located in these preferred locations, the beanbag chair, the swing, the corner of the classroom. They're small. They don't make a lot of eye contact. They don't do a lot. And they have this kind of rhythmic pushing out of the behavior that's often a similar form. And they're kind of saying like, I'm a bad dude. Don't F with me. Don't take my stuff. Don't ask me to do stuff. It's like these kids are sending messages. Yeah,
Right.
they're sending you a message. I'm a bad dude. Don't F with me. That's the message of SIB. But again, you didn't do anything bad, but there it's still going because they're just sending out reminders. This is, again, a casual way to talk about it. So what do we do with these kids? Well, it's very counterintuitive and it's not easy to treat. I'll tell you the first thing. When we do the analysis, the typical rule of analysis is do not put in an evocative event until you get 4 minutes of zero problem behavior and they're happy, relaxed, and engaged. That's how we get people safe. That's the typical rule of analysis, this performance-based analyses we teach people. Well, with avoidance kids, it's not that at all. 20 minutes and you're still seeing the behavior, you have to put the EO in because you have to convert it from an avoidance behavior to an escape behavior. You have to teach them to stop wasting behavior. You have to teach them that their behavior has power. Okay. So despite them trickling out SIVs, you put that EO in anyway, you give the signal of doom. You get close soon as they have any problem behavior that, might be in the repertoire, you reinforce fast. Then 30 seconds later, you put that EO back in. You see that behavior, you reinforce it fast. And what I show people in trainings is we convert avoidance behavior to escape behavior. You can usually do it within 30 minutes. That's all it takes. And then you have no more behavior trickling out during reinforcement. All of a sudden, that idea that it's automatic, now you realize how bullshit that was. That it's not automatic at all when you have no behavior happening in reinforcement. It happens when and only when the EO is put in place and it turns off immediately following reinforcement. So again, the trick is to first profile the kid, and there's some indicators of avoidance. Then it's about changing the rules of engagement in the analysis that sound a bit risky, and they are, so you can empower the kid. And then the next part of the process is it's time consuming, but you have to have people hang around these kids within as close as you can get without triggering the avoidance SIB. And you have to hang out and not do anything terrible from their perspective. Don't give a demand. Don't take anything away. Don't redirect. Just be totally available until the kids come out. What they'll do is they'll come out from under their blankets and they'll engage in social bids. Again, none of these kids want to be alone. No one wants to be alone. They just want you to cut the shit. Stop doing things they're not good at, comfortable with, what have you. And so some people have spent hours, and it's not pairing. It's not that. Pairing is too talkative, too controlling. It's not that. It's being available to receive the social bid and not purveying any evocative events that you learned about through the interview process. Then after that, you can't prompt these kids. That's the other mistake too. You can't prompt kids with this avoidance history. You'll get the avoidance behavior popping back up. So what you got to do is model everything. There is no prompting with these kids. So you're going to teach a communication response. You model it. You show them. You present the EO. You emit the button press my way. You reinforce. They're not doing anything. They're just watching you from under their blanket. You have to do that like 50, 70 times. And then you might see them press the button as you progress the challenge a little deeper. You really get it under evocative control. You get the mand under evocative control, which now makes it a mand, but you didn't do it with prompting because prompting's not going to help with these kids. Then the rest of it's just SVT. But you understand what I just described is not typical. It's counterintuitive, and it is not even consistent with the way we do PFA SVT for most kids. So that's why we need to know whether avoidance is part of the game. We show several cases in our trainings now, which they're not research studies, but if you see the videos and you see the social validation by the parents, we got these people are eliminating SIB completely with these kids that they used to, went to fancy hospitals and had the diagnosis of automatic reinforcement. And we find them, again, all hiding in a corner with muscle atrophy because they don't move their bodies. We had some kids wheeled into the clinic because they don't walk. And then next thing you know, they're big and moving. The branches we work on with these kids are always get big. To teach them to get big. That might mean just walking, stretching to get something off a shelf, get big, because this whole notion, we always find them small and tight and just avoiding everything in life. They tend to be highly anxious. They tend to be low motor, low tone. That's all part of the profile. Okay, moving on, tics. We've known tics and SIB are correlate. We've known that since the 60s, but again, we lose the thread sometimes. Some SIB, we're convinced right now, and convinced despite lack of direct evidence, as convinced people are of automatic reinforcement. So some people say, well, how do you know? I say, well, I know just as much as I used to know when I said automatic reinforcement, but actually I know more because it works. You know what I mean? But that said, treatment utility, the truth kind of lies there sometimes for some of us. Anyways, these kids with tics, their profile is very different. Kids with avoidance, they don't want to be in their protective equipment. They certainly don't want you to hold them or be near them. By contrast, tics, kids who the behavior seems to be an uncontrollable involuntary motor act, kind of like a stutter or motor tic, they tend to like their protective equipment. If they have equipment, they'll put their head in it. They'll put their arm off. You try to take off their equipment and they can speak. They'll say, no, put it back on. Okay. They're the kind of kids that want to be held. They're the kind of kids that want staff to hold them, hug them hard, sit next to them. They're the kind of kids that self-restrain. We've known about self-restrain SIB for so long, but never really understood it. Wildly confused by the relationships. Okay. But these kids with tic-like SIB are basically saying, I can't help it. I don't want to punch myself. Help me. And so they want to wear the baggy sweatshirts to self-restrain in. They want staff to hold them. They want to be in restraint. So the first part of the process is figuring out the restraint condition that yields zero tic-like SIB that they prefer. So, I mean, for one of the kids in the videos, it was almost like an underwear pants assessment. He liked to stick his hands in his pants down through his shorts, and then he had those white hospital posy mitts on. If the pants were too loose, his hand would come out and he'd slap. If the pants were too tight and he couldn't get his hand in comfortably, he'd slap. If he had the right protective equipment, we got the zero. These kids tend to be big. They're social. They're running around the room, eye contact, all that. As soon as their equipment isn't proper or the hold isn't proper, they SIB. With these kids, you often have to keep that equipment in place. So the hard part with these kids is all branches, all SBT, communicating, everything has to be done while they're restrained. So these are kids where we have them press the augmentative device with their toe. Their tolerance response is an elbow touch because their hands are restrained. Okay. You can't make these kids come out of restraint during the teaching because they have tics. They can't control the SIB. And when you're teaching them, you're stressing them. We know tics occur when kids are anxious, frustrated, or passively engaged. And so what we do with these kids is it's an accident that it works. We try to get them HRE. That's the whole point. Tics are least likely when kids are happy, relaxed, and engaged. It's most likely when they're anxious and passively engaged. So we spend a lot of time in reinforcement. We spend a lot of time finding conditions of protective equipment. We never ask them to leave the hold or protective equipment during the EO. We kind of go with their restraint flow. And then in reinforcement, we wait until they release themselves from their holds and protective equipment. And they do. Once you teach them that this is a very comfortable, non-threatening environment, they will come out of their restraint to play or to eat or to engage. And once they start doing that, now we can start teaching outside of equipment. Okay. That's a lot.
Yeah. I have so many questions, but I think one of the things that you've successfully done is really generate a lot of interest in the upcoming course. So when that does come out, let me know, and I'll be sure to point people in the right direction because there's so many. I've got a gazillion questions, and I think I'll probably just put a pin in it for the time being.
We've been talking for a while. I think that's the right move, but you're right, Matt. I really want to convey to people this in case it gets lost in the details. I want to convey the hope that we don't meet SIB we can't treat anymore. With the maybe Lesch-Nyhan, SIB associated with Lesch-Nyhan, super hard still for all of us. But I'm talking maybe outside that one particular genetic condition, and I'm including the other genetic conditions like Cornelia de Lange and PWS and all that. I'm saying we can treat SIB that we used to say is automatically reinforced. And the path to freedom is first not saying automatic reinforcement to allow you to look for the controlling variables and to discern, to discriminate between tic-like behavior and avoidant-like behavior. And then you have to change the way you do your process a bit. I just want to give people hope. And I don't usually say, hey, you should come to FTF for consultation. We're busy and we're here if you need us. But I will tell you this. If you're out there and you're measuring SIB on a daily basis, you should come get some consultation to fix that problem. Kids should not be under the routine care of a BCBA, whacking and hurting themselves regularly. We just don't need to do that anymore. We can get zero with these kids. We can get skills developed, and then we can, hold them to the highest expectations and still not trigger the behavior. And it takes work, and it's not a short amount of time, but nevertheless, it's totally possible. And that's really what I want to convey to people, that hope.
One last postscript on this SIB segment is that there's an old timer. If you're listening, I hope you don't mind me tacting you in that way. I won't share his name, but there's a guy who's been listening to this podcast for years and years and years. And like once a year or once every few months, he'll send me like an 8-paragraph email, and he'll just like break down an episode and stuff like that.
Awesome.
It's awesome. I love it. And, great guy. And has been in behavior analysis, probably before I was born. And I just turned 50, so just give you some perspective. So anyway, he once wrote me, and I think it might have been after one of your episodes, and he talked about the concept of automatic reinforcement, and he shared some EAB literature from the EAB world of organisms responding on like obnoxiously lean schedules of reinforcement, and that was his preferred take on the so-called automatic reinforcement. That some
he
of
was
these
considering it adjunctive behavior, I assume.
something like that. Yeah. And he was,
the behavior between reinforcements as they get temporally extended. Yeah,
it was interesting analysis. So I want to mention that really quickly as something else to throw in the mix. So
I can't say I see that because I'm not looking for it, and I'm not saying it's not there. But I'll tell you, I like that idea better than automatic reinforcement.
Yeah.
Because it's in our control and it's learned and that's really our sweet spot,
Good deal. So I think there's one last thing I'd like to get to. We've been going way long. If you have a few minutes, I'd like to ask you, and maybe throughout the conversation, you've already hit on these already, but it's been, I think 9 years since I think I first talked to you about ISCAs and skills-based treatment, things like that.
Wow.
So it's been a while, and earlier on in this conversation, you said that the process evolved even in the last couple of years. So, what are some of the big picture things that you have changed as a result of the outcomes that you're seeing, as a result of the research you and your colleagues and your extended colleagues that all over the place are doing? Yeah. So if you can just give us maybe a couple of quick points about how this process has evolved over time.
Thanks. That's a great ending thing. I'll tell you the thing I'm most excited about right now, and it's the biggest change, is people are seeing this as an integrative model. Early on, I did the same thing. Oh, should you do EFL or SBT? Peak or SBT? AIM or SBT, ACT or SBT, you go, the CABES model or SBT, precision teaching or SBT. Now people fully recognize and embrace this idea that this is a process or a format to then connect your preferred assessment and curricula to. I guess one of my recent favorites is the Early Start Denver model. And I didn't know much about it early in my career, but it's a pretty useful assessment and treatment process for young kids on the spectrum. And what places like SOAR, for instance, out in Colorado, they're very expert in ESDM. Well, they're also expert in SBT. And what they do is, if the child has any probability of severe behavior, they put them in SBT, but the branches, as we call them, as they get to the table of high expectations, all their branches are ESDM branches. Mark Dixon and I are collaborating on a really great project out with the Department of Ed in Hawaii. So hopefully we're going to be maturing this into a very large randomized control trial.
Wow, that's exciting.
Very exciting. And the kids in the treatment group get SBT plus peak or AIM, depending on their needs and developmental abilities. And the control group kids get ABA as usual. And then if one's more effective than the other, that group will get the alternative, which presumably will be SBT and peak and AIM in the following year. So the point being that I'm getting to work with all these experts in other areas as we integrate SBT into the other curriculum. We're no longer thinking of it as an or, it's just the questions of what's the scope and sequence, when do we combine it? Where do we put in the act? Do we put it in the beginning? Is it a branch? And so this whole notion of integration is just super exciting and really has given me kind of a breath of fresh air doing SBT because I'm in the humble seat learning how to do these other ways of ABA. So I think that's the thing I'm most excited about. And I think in the upcoming years, that's going to be where the exciting research is the scope and sequence of combining SBT with other ways of doing ABA. On a more micro level, that's kind of a macro thing. On a more micro level, I'll tell you just a couple tactics that are so sweet. When I see people using them, it's just, it's so good. And it's this idea of, when you're doing this chaining and you're out in the middle of the chain, let's say for listeners that know CAB 3, that means they're finally at the table starting to do their work, meaning they've learned to communicate, tolerate, relinquish, transition, and now they're starting to do their work. So that's like 5 chain links in the chain. And what we taught people to do, and they're doing it better than we've ever even taught it, is if they're going to reinforce an early member of the chain, in other words, something that's been mastered, they never reinforce immediately. They only reinforce the terminal link in the chain immediately because that's the one that has not been at strength yet. But let's say they're intermittently reinforcing early members of the chain, which is an integral part of the process, and the child communicates, and the data sheet says reinforced communication. You'll never see the kid hits the button or says my way. You're never going to see them say, of course you can have your way. What you'll see instead by people really expert is they put in the delay. Kid says my way, and there's nothing. There's no stimulus change. And what do those kids do? Because we gave them a history of immediate reinforcement, what those kids do is they look up and they check in. And they give a beautiful check-in response, maybe with eye contact, we don't care. But they're basically looking towards the listener for information. And then that person has 2 choices. They can either say, sure, you can have your way, or not right now. And they move on to the next link in the chain. And we're just seeing these like amazing interactions between the implementer and the student without any direct instruction of social initiation, eye contact, orientation, any of that. So this idea to really use micro delay following previously learned members of the chain and immediate reinforcement for the last member of the chain, experts doing this process, when they show that on video, it is just a beautiful set of interactions. So that is a little tactic that we're really going hard teaching people, and I love it. Another one is framing reinforcement as a choice, even when kids cannot yet speak. And it's at the same part of the process. So they're at the table finally, and they do 1 or 2 things and you're ready to reinforce. We just don't reinforce. We don't say, oh, thanks for, matching or drawing or speaking. You can have your way. It's, oh, nice triangle. Do you want to draw more shapes or do you want to go to your way? Constantly putting in choice, whether it's with hand gestures or with language, because what kids are teaching us now is as they're in the chaining process, a lot of the time they elect to stay at the table. They, in other words, the branches that used to be so evocative for problem behavior, they're no longer. And you can't know that unless you give that kid the choice so they can teach you the relative value of, the synthesized reinforcement condition versus being taught. And it's a beautiful thing when kids choose to be taught by people. And that's what I'm seeing when people are watching the stories, when I go on the road and people are showing their cases and people see that. It's a really beautiful moment. And so we're really encouraging people, put that choice in so they can teach you what's important to them at the time. And they may surprise you what they're teaching you. So that little tactic I found very exciting. So you can see there's like these macro things, this integration is super exciting, but also just these little teaching tactics that are becoming more refined, and they're not new, man, right? They're shaping, delay, chaining, It's just different. It's just crafty differential reinforcement, but people are getting a lot of bang for their buck when they're doing this process in that kind of expert way.
I see. It's all very exciting stuff. And getting back to that checking in process that you were talking about earlier, one of the questions I was thinking of asking is, what might be some experimental questions for folks in grad school or just in general who are interested in this process. And that alone sounds like a fertile area, in terms of, measuring things like joint attention and whatnot, or the development of it. This sounds like a lot of cool stuff there. So
you asked me, I'm sorry, I want to do one more thing. I know we're long on time.
I'm here for you. So
you said, we should talk about future research. You got young listeners and they might be, there's a PhD programs. And so I'm so glad you brought that up, because you are right on. What we need to do research on is exactly what you said. All this social development stuff, one of the core features of autism. I would love to consider doing research with PFA and SBT and do those proper measures. A lot of it is just doing the process, but measuring more widely. We need to just expand on measures, because there's a lot of indirect effects of all sorts of good ABA, including SBT, and they're just left on the cutting room floor, if you will. They're edited out by our decisions of what to measure. And I really do think more people will embrace ABA when they kind of see those indirect gains, and we're seeing a lot of indirect gains. Other allied professionals, sometimes their biggest gains are all indirect, and they'll admit that. It's not what they're targeting, it's all the indirects they're getting. And some SLPs and OTs will measure those things. And I've read some articles, and I believe some people do a better job measuring those beautiful indirect effects. And so I think that's a fertile area for research. I think we have to do some RCTs of this stuff. So I'm glad hooking up with Mark Dixon, because he's very good at that, among other things. But I encourage people to kind of expand our methodology. We're still using single subject design, but we're also complementing it with designs that speak to other audiences. So we've been saying that for a long time as a field, but I'm just reiterating that. I'll tell you though, Matt, I'm not as excited about research as I used to be. As you can imagine, I get more excited going out there doing training and seeing these socially validated outcomes. But I want to see it captured. And so a couple of things in that regard. I'm really appreciative of the people that are working hard to do research. Josh Jessel, close colleague of mine, but he's just doing his thing. And he's doing a lot of research. And so I really appreciate people who are sticking to it and doing that research. And he's one of them. So if you haven't looked at his research lately, I encourage you to do that. But I'll tell you, when I go to conferences, Matt, and this is where I'm going to sound a little negative, and I don't want to end on this, so I hope you have a good joke to end this podcast on. But I'll tell you, I go to conferences, and I still love it. When I go to a regional conference, I always stay as a listener. I go to talks from morning till night. I don't just go to speak. I listen. And sometimes I'm hearing some stuff that I'm really impressed with, and that's always fun. But I tell you, the more data in the talk, sometimes the less impressed I'm getting. And I'm seeing people do all these studies where they're like correlating, let's say, I don't know, sleep problem with SIB. And I see the graph, and I can do math from a graph. I've seen enough graphs, and I'm looking at the math, and I'm seeing a kid hit himself maybe 1,200 times. So we can correlate that he sleeps less on days where he has let SIB, or vice versa. He has let SIB on the days following less sleep. Well, those correlations have been known since the 80s. And I'm not sure people in our field need to get back into that. And I just ask people that when they're doing research, they ask this question: is it worth it? Is it worth just sitting back and correlating? Is it worth just counting the behavior? Or maybe we need to step up and get zero. And so that's the thing, Matt, that's why I'm struggling with research and our methodology, because our research requires baselines. It's a baseline methodology. And a baseline means an elevated rate of severe behavior. If, like me, you work with people with severe behavior, and I just won't do that anymore. I can't do that anymore. And when I see people having rates of behavior repeatedly on a graph, I have a hard time with it. I'm respectful. And if they're young, the younger they are, the less I'll say something to them. And I apologize for the people my age or older in the field, but I say something then. And it's really, I think we have to stop playing around with problems and stop finding it acceptable to let kids engage in severe behavior to satisfy our curiosities when we know how to get zero. And it doesn't mean we can't do research. It just means we have to get better at doing research. Like, what's your control condition? You know what I mean? It's like, it's about figuring out methodologically, how can we be humanistic and scientific? And I'll be honest, I don't see both of those in a lot of research in ABA right now. And I don't know what to do about it. I tried at a time, and instead I just kind of ran and started doing something else. I don't do as much research, but I just want to put that out there for people to really think about, especially the young people in the field. When you're doing research, are you just graphing severe behavior? And I think you might be uncomfortable with that study 10 years from now. So you might want to come up with a different way to ask the question that protects the dignity and safety of those clients.
Well, let me maybe, so what would your suggestion be to demonstrate the before and after? How do you get the before and after picture? That's the, I mean, because when I am doing school consultation, and most of the behaviors that I'm working on are not severe, but they're chronic and disruptive and frankly annoying and whatnot. And I do, when I'm talking to teachers, and I'm not trying to publish any data. I'm not trying to, get like, I'm not aiming for long periods of steady state responding in the Johnson and Pennypacker, tradition. I'm just trying to be able to say, does this work?
Yes.
So I can go to the teacher and say, look, now that you've implemented this, see how much better things are right now. Not that they need a graph to understand that, but, at the very least, so, I mean, I feel like I'm sticking up for taking baseline data, but I'm
I'm with you, Matt. I'm with you because what you're doing, what you can do is rely on the data that already exists, then you do your process, and then you remeasure in the same context in which the data that already existed was measured in. And if you're looking for a simple pre-post, you have it. To be honest, that's where ABC recording or incident reports have utility.
Sure.
You know what I mean? You have it. They're regulated measures. So we have a bunch of regulated measures in schools that are already there. Use them. But what I'm saying, and especially if it's non-dangerous, I don't even have a problem with these steady state baselines because they're just happening and no one's getting hurt by it. Disruptive, annoying, sure. I'm talking about SIB, aggression, property obstruction, steady state baselines or precursor analyses to look at conditional probabilities to see if it's before or after or during. Oh my, we got a technology where we can get zero, just get zero. How do you show control with those? You show control over skill development. If you want to do a probe where you get a first instance of a response, I think that's acceptable. It's not the steady state thousands of SIBs. If you want to, I'll tell you, where the real trick is of having a safe and dignified research project with kids with severe behavior? It's people who respect the idea of response class membership, who respect the idea because there's enough studies that have taught us this, that if people say they whine before they slap themselves, and you have a baseline of whining, that is sufficient because that is a proxy or indicator of whether your treatment will work for SIB. And if you're wrong, the SIB will occur in treatment. Do you see what I'm saying? So this idea of response classes, about using interviews and analyses to reveal response class membership, to be okay taking an inferential leap, that if someone reports it to be a associated member, and you only treat that and there's no resurgence of severe behavior, that you treated severe behavior without baselining the severe behavior. I think that's the trick. But it's hard. It's easy in practice to have this conversation. It's hard in Java to have the conversation. Trust me, they're injurious, though I'm just showing whining. I get that. But we make inferential leaps all the time. We've had automatic reinforcement in our language system for 40 years, all through an inferential leap. So we make inferential leaps. I think we have to understand when to make them. And we have a lot of empirical evidence supporting the inferential leap about precursors and severe behavior. So that might be too roaming, but the point is, be thoughtful when you do research. To avoid repeated measures of severe behavior, there are other ways. Design ways, again, response class membership ways, and also focus on skill development. these folks that like to gather around the constructional approach, it's been around a very long time. It bears a lot of similarity to SVT by historical accident, but I appreciate that focus on skill development. And maybe we don't need to always measure the severe behavior to say we did something important for severe behavior. Maybe just measuring the amazing skill development and then socially validating the outcome. And the parent says, he hasn't had SIB in a year, and we get satisfied with that. Again, that's going to be hard for some people, but that's another example of people moving in that direction. I appreciate them.
Right. All right. Well, Greg, you said you had some things on your mind. And that turned out to be true. So I appreciate the say-do correspondence. This has been a fun conversation. As always, if people want to learn more about the on-demand trainings and things like that, they can just go to ftfbc.com. Love links in the show notes. Yeah. So congrats on your new endeavors and making this stuff work at scale. And I really look forward to seeing, what you and your colleagues do.
Man, I appreciate you. I appreciate this chance to connect both with you, because I just like talking to you about these things because you're so thoughtful, but also just the chance to connect with people on your podcast. I can't thank you enough. So I won't say until next time. I keep saying this will be the last one. Yeah.
No.
But I won't say that. I'll just say again, thanks a lot. And I'll keep listening. All right.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.